Google Slides, but that didn't play well with this monitor, so I'm using PowerPoint, which is great. Microsoft makes an awesome product. However, when I Alt-Tab over to my project for the live demo, if I don't close down PowerPoint, it will just sit here and look like this. So if I do that, I'm like, oh, and if you look at the assets, blah, 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 someone like raise your hand and say like, dude, you need to turn the PowerPoint off. Because last time I did this, well, not last time, but a couple weeks ago, they let me talk for like 20 minutes until finally someone was like, we can't see anything. So, hi everybody. I want to say, yeah, thanks for coming out on a Monday night. Nice, cool evening. I want to say thanks to the IGDA for having me. We've been kind of planning this for a long time and excited to be here talking. I, too, am also involved with the IGDA. I'm on the newly formed and hopefully, I'm not sure if it's actually been announced, but I'm going to be on the mental health SIG, the mental health special interest group. So involved in the IGDA for that as well. But I am here, my name is Christian Allen. I am an Unreal Evangelist with Epic Games. So this is my contact information. I'm the Unreal Evangelist for North America, and what that means is, generally what I do is I spend about 30% of my time explaining to people what an evangelist does, because that's everybody's first question, what's an evangelist do? And I go, well, I evangelize.
Hallelujah.
What's that?
Hallelujah.
Yeah, there you go. Actually, when I bought my car, they said, what's your job? I said, evangelist. And they said, oh, I'm Protestant. And I was like, oh. No, not evangelist. Thanks for letting me know. What it really means is, I do the traditional evangelism stuff. I go out and do things like this. I talk about Unreal. But on the biz dev side, I focus on indie game developers. So basically anybody who's using the UL license. Now I do want to announce Unity has the discount for IGDA members. Unreal also has a discount. Anybody can go, IGDA members can go download Unreal for free. So 100% discount for everybody in this room. You can go download it right now. So, but this talk, so I do spend a lot of time with independent game developers, essentially helping them ship their Unreal titles. So I work from everyone from hobbyists all the way up to AAA indies, basically anybody who's not using a custom license. In North America, United States and Canada is under my bailiwick. We have 5 other evangelists around the world, 2 in South America, 1 for all of Latin America, 1 focusing on Brazil. We have 1 in Oceania, focusing on Australia, New Zealand, and Southeast Asia. We have 1 in Europe, 1 now focused on Eastern Europe. And then those are the evangelists, and then of course in the other country regions like Japan and China and South Korea, we have actual focused biz dev groups. So that's me. This is my contact Twitter. If you would like, if you want to take pictures of me and tweet them to me, that would be great. So you can follow me at Twitter. If you want to follow up professionally, feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn. Christian.Allen or Christian-Allen-designer. I am the Christian Allen both on Twitter and LinkedIn. I'm the game designer, not the MMA fighter. So there is an MMA fighter, but he always has his shirt off in all his pictures. And then on Facebook, I'm just going to ignore you, so don't message me on Facebook. So I'm here talking about accelerating your game dev. I'm really focused on marketplace and licensed content. I wanted to give a talk that would apply not just to Unreal developers. And so while I do work for Epic and my job is to promote Unreal and a lot of the content I'm going to talk about is Unreal, hopefully the lessons that I'm going to talk a bit about will apply whether you're using Unreal, Unity. Basically, if you're using licensed assets at all, hopefully those will apply. I also may run through this way too fast, and if I do that, then we'll just have way more time to Q&A, and anybody who's been to my Unreal meetups or any of my groups know that I just love Q&A, so I'm happy to go. Our wonderful hosts will cut me off when I go too long. So first off, my background. Even though I do work for the business development group at Epic, I am a game designer. I started as a game developer in the late 90s. I started making mods for Rainbow Six, and that's how I got hired at Red Storm Entertainment. Thanks, PowerPoint. Go ahead. And so I started as an assistant designer working on Rainbow Six, moved over to Ghost Recon, worked my way up to lead designer and creative director on the Ghost Recon franchise, mainly focusing on the Xbox. So I was there for about 5 years through Gra 2, did a little bit of work on Ghost Recon Future Soldier as well, and then they totally stole my story for Ghost Recon Predator, so I put that on my as well. Then I moved on to Bungie, where I was the design lead on Halo Reach for a few years. The best Halo. And then I was at Warner Brothers. At Warner Brothers, I worked on the production side on the Mad Max project. I also did some stuff with the Midway acquisition and did a lot of IP pitches. And then I worked, I was based out of what eventually stopped being and then started being Monolith again, doing early prototyping for Middle-earth Shadows of Mordor. And so that was a fun stint. And then after Warner Brothers, I actually founded my own studio called Serellan LLC that was based here out of Seattle. We ran a Kickstarter. That's how I initially funded my studio. We shipped a game called Takedown Red Sabre that shipped in 2013 on PC and Xbox Live Arcade. We shipped a game called Epsilon on Steam Early Access on PC. And then I individually shipped a game called Hotel Blind, which was a virtual reality simulation of being a blind person, which is about as exciting as it sounds. But it sounds a lot better than it looks because it's just a black screen because you're blind. So I also, while I was running Serellan, I was also a game design consultant on the After Earth franchise, which I was working with Overbrook Entertainment, which is Will Smith's production company, on what eventually became the After Earth mobile game. So that was my big break into transmedia in Hollywood. As we know, the After Earth franchise, the movie was so successful that it's blossomed. It's competing with Star Wars, which is really good. So I'm still waiting for the follow-up call from Overbrook about what we're doing next with After Earth. But the big lesson I learned is don't hire your son to be the star of your movie. So it was all right. The script was really good. Anyway, so what I'm talking about here is licensed content. Does anybody not know what licensed content is? All right, good, awesome. By the way, how many folks in here are game developers, indie or hobbyists? Anybody coming from any other areas but not game development?
Sound and music.
Sound and music, okay.
School.
School, okay, all right. Cool. So, when we talk about licensed content, there's 3 primary places that we're going to be talking about where we get our licensed content. And for the folks watching online, when we talk about licensed content, we're really talking about going out and purchasing, licensing content that your team doesn't create. That's generally different from outsourcing. Outsourcing is generally when you go out and you contract with an outside entity to build specific content, only generally for you. So you're contracting with a outside group. They're making content. You're approving it. You're bringing it in. When we're talking about licensed content, usually that content has already been produced by some other entity, and you're licensing a copy to use in your game specifically. And that's what I'm going to talk about is games. Obviously, there's lots of different routes that if you were in advertising or graphics or whatever, lots of different things. But the main source that folks tend to get licensed content today is engine marketplaces. That's the Unreal Marketplace or the Unity Asset Store. The engine-specific marketplaces provide content that you can go purchase for the engine that you're using. You can download it. It's generally formatted to work with the engine that you use. It's generally, the pipeline is really easy to do. And so that's the most common place that people these days tend to get their assets, either the Unity Asset Store or the Unreal Marketplace. They have some good benefits. I can't speak a lot about the Unity Asset Store, but on the Unreal Marketplace, we do curate everything that's on the Unreal Marketplace. So we check it, we make sure it works, it's approved by our marketplace team. We have a review system, we have a refund system, we have all those things. The next place that you're going to get licensed content is on stock content sites. By this I specifically mean places like TurboSquid. These are places where they make 3D assets that you can go out and license or purchase for use in your projects. The difference between something like TurboSquid and say the Unreal Marketplace is the TurboSquid assets may not be specifically made for games. They're 3D assets, they may have all the same textures and materials and animations that come with the packages, but a lot of times that content may not be tailored for games. It may not have LODs or lower resolution versions of the models. It may be perfectly applicable for using in games, and I know in Takedown we licensed a bunch of characters from a place called Rocketbox Libraries. I'm not sure if they're still around. I know they got purchased by Havoc, which then got purchased by Microsoft. I Googled them earlier to put some content in, and they didn't show up. But the main thing to think about when you're licensing content from something like TurboSquid is to make sure that it's going to be applicable for your project. There's no point in going and buying, a $1,200 tiger if that $1,200 tiger, that's an awful expensive tiger, but there's no point in going and buying that if it's 12 million polygons and it's not going to run in your game ever and doesn't come with any LODs or anything like that. Obviously, you're going to want to check the formatting and things like that to make sure that it's going to be something that you can use in your suite of software. The other place that you're going to get licensed content for is traditional content. What I mean by that is specifically, generally, traditional licensing, if you're using it in a game, is generally going to be music. You can purchase music specifically like off the Unreal Marketplace. We actually just sponsored some content that includes some fantasy music that users can download for free, and there's music packs up there.
Pretty cool.
But a lot of times you might find a composer or a producer who's makes music that really fits within what you want to do, and they might do their licensing through Marmoset or something like that. The other place that you might get a lot of that is photo reference. If you're going to Shutterstock to get photo reference for your concept artists, or to do montages for your game or for your marketing materials. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the ins and outs and some of that, but those are the general places that you're going to get licensed content, is the engine-specific marketplaces, stock content sites like TurboSquid, and then traditional content licensing through like Marmoset, Shutterstock, other places like that. So why do you want to use licensed content? What's the point of licensed content? And the main thing is to accelerate your game development. For traditional art assets, it's pretty apparent, what you get out of that. If you don't have an art team to buy that to build that tiger off of TurboSquid, it might be financially viable to go out and just purchase that tiger and put it into your game. So art assets is pretty straightforward. I'm going to license this pack of rocks. I will then distribute these rocks throughout my game, and now I don't have to have my art team build the rocks. But other places that you can use to accelerate your development is for things like prototyping. And I'll talk a little bit about prototyping with shippable content, but also buying things like, for example, in Unreal Marketplace, you can buy blueprint packs. So in my game Epsilon, it was a squad-based tactical shooter on the PC, and I wanted to have a radio menu that I use for the squad orders. So if you've ever played an old school PC game, it had a dynamic order system. So if I pointed at a door and I wanted to give an order, then the squad would stack up on the door, and then if I pointed at the squad and said breach the door, then they would breach. And I needed this order system that would change dynamically based on what you were looking at. And I thought a radio wheel would be the way to do that, because that seemed like it really good. But I didn't have a UI programmer, and I didn't know how to build a radio wheel. So I went out and bought a radio wheel blueprint set that was actually built for an inventory system. And it was a radial inventory system that would expand and contract based on what you added to your inventory. And so I bought that, I brought it into the game, edited the blueprints and changed it from an inventory system, used the same radial wheel mechanic that was all built in, so it would expand and contract based on how many orders were available to the squad, and had that in about 3 days versus having to actually build the functionality of having actually building a radial system. So you can get a lot of bandwidth out of buying assets or licensing assets, both for just pure use and to help accelerate your development by either ripping stuff out and using it, repurposing it for your game, or even just using it as learning resources. When we're talking about development budgets, I know the indies among us, every cent counts. So trust me, I've been there. I've been on every single side of development. But the amount of time and effort that you can save your team by going out and spending $50 or $100 buying a blueprint pack that does something very similar to what you want to do, and then learning from that or building off of it can save you a lot of time. Now the thing that hopefully you're doing, or that I recommend that people do when they're using licensed content, is to allow your team to focus on your game's uniqueness. I'll talk a little bit about asset flipping later, but generally I don't recommend like, oh hey, you want to build a game, just go to the Unreal Marketplace and download all this content and just flip it in a game and you're good to go. Now you can do that, and I'm going to show you a demo of what that looks like, what I did. But the things that I tell people to think about when they're thinking about licensed content, I've got a great example of this coming up next, is if you're building a game, let's say you wanted to set a game in an open world game set in the Aztec Empire. So you're going to be this traveling North American warrior traveling through the ancient Aztec Empire, and it's going to be open world. So the biggest thing that you want to have, or the biggest showcase that you want to have, is Aztec architecture. You're going to have these Aztec temples and this beautiful architecture that they created. That's what you want your art team to focus on. Now you're also going to need a lot of kind of ruins and huts scattered throughout this big open world that you're going to build. So maybe for those assets you go out and license that content to flush out that world. Definitely you should go and license some rocks, because your art team, they want to build everything, right? Artists want to build everything. They don't want to license anybody else's stuff. They don't, they always want to build everything. But you want to have them spend their time on those key assets, those Aztec visuals in characters and architecture that's going to showcase the game and really nail what the player is going to experience. So that's how I tend to tell people to think about it. And if you're building water, just go license water shaders. We've all built water a million times. We don't need to build it again. The other thing that can be a real benefit is prototyping with shippable content. And I'm going to show some of that when I do the Parachess demo in a few minutes. And I think I have been really impressed by the lessons or the learnings for the game design of the game that I'm working on, but also just the technical things that you run into early on when you're prototyping with shippable content. And I'll give an example of what this is, but the traditional way that you build a game is you build your prototype in gray box, you get everything working, it's playing the way you want, everything's gray boxes and your single default character and everything's running great, and then you bring your art team in, they start scaling everything up budget-wise, and then all of a sudden you're running at 5 frames a second. And now you got to go back and strip everything out and do, get everything performant, do all that. But if you start with a shippable content, for example, if you picked one of our Paragon characters, if you're working on, say, a third-person shooter, and you're going to have this third-person shooter, we know we're going to have one character who's on screen, who's going to be the high-resolution character. If you just grab one of our Paragon characters and use that as your prototype, instead of some great gray box character, you're going to have shippable level materials on it, shippable level of animation sets, shippable polygons, and that can just be the base budget for your main third-person character that you hand off to your art team. Doesn't mean that you need to ship with any of that content. You might end up shipping with some of it, if so, great. But right there, especially if you're an indie, you've got the budget built for a character, and you can say, you know what, hey, we all look at this, we all agree this is the quality level that we want to go for, we all agree that these budgets are just fine, so let's just write these into stone and we're going to use these budgets to ship our game right off the bat. And then you're testing with that shippable level content, if you run into performance issues, well, it's not because of our main character budget, it's because of, something else we've introduced to the scene. And that's especially, true if you're going to be the case where a lot of indies are, where, you prototype, and then boom, we got it, we're hot. Let's go into full production tomorrow. And you just start throwing everything in. That's where you run into a lot of issues with performance, and that's where prototyping with shippable content can save you a lot of time. I've even run into issues with Parachess, just having full libraries of animations where I hadn't even thought that would be an issue, and have given some talks on doing hard loading and soft loading assets and blueprints that I ran into because I had a full library of animations that I was able to import, and thought, oh, this will be great. This is all the animations. I put them in, and then went, oh, now I have memory issues. Maybe I need to solve that earlier rather than later. The other thing to think about when it comes to licensed content is supporting your project. And by that, I mean flipping things around and thinking about licensing out the content that you're creating. One of the teams that I talked to just a couple months ago, they were working on a medieval hack and slash game. Relatively straightforward, beat 'em up, but they had a really in-depth skill tree. So a lot of weapons that you could unlock, a lot of different moves that you could unlock, and they actually built that into marketplace content packs that they put up and were selling on the marketplace, because they had their hero weapons that they kept out of their packs, but all the leading up to, I think they had 120 sword, axe, club combinations that they built, and they just put these into medieval weapons packs and were selling them for $19.99 a pop. I don't know how many they sold, but they said they were getting a good chunk of change to help support development. Again, something to think about. So, great example of what I was talking about as far as accelerating your game development and focusing on what is unique about your game is a game called Maelstrom. There's an article up on UnrealEngine.com. If you Google Unreal Engine Maelstrom, I had a big giant link here, but it's pointless. They have a great article about how they used the assets. And Maelstrom, as you can see, is a ship combat game. And they use a ton of marketplace assets. From water effects to rock effects to background buildings to even actually the boats, which are the main characters of their game. Now, you won't find this ship on the Unreal Marketplace. And they didn't actually, for their ships, they didn't take any straight assets off the marketplace and just say, oh, this will be a good boat for the character, because they were doing a fantasy setting and they don't have any kind of standard looking ships. But they did buy a lot of ship and naval assets and rip pieces out of those and repurpose them into their unique assets. And no one's ever looked, well, that I know of, has looked at Maelstrom and gone like, oh, that just looks like a cookie cutter clone game. No, they have still their unique art style. They focused on what makes their game stand out and looks good. And so there's a great article that you can look up, how Gunpowder took that and adapted those assets. And they used a ton of them, blueprints, stuff like that as well. So, things to keep in mind. The biggest thing that I recommend that folks do when they start getting licensed content in is to segregate that content. And the reason I bring this up is because the first thing that your art team wants to do is they've got their folders set up the way they have their folders set up. So they've got their characters folder and their environment folder and their materials folder and their effects folder. And you buy a character set, and you're like, cool, I got these new characters, here you go, art team, and the art team's like, sweet, okay, the skeleton goes over here, and the materials, I'm going to put them all over there, and we're going to put it all into our formatting, and that's great. But I actually recommend that you don't do that. Now, today with modern engines, you don't necessarily have to move stuff around and have it all in your folder structure. If you can, I actually recommend trying to keep that content segregated. And if you can't keep it segregated, at least tracking where that content is. This is important if you're using outsourced content as well. That applies to outsourced content and licensed content. From an outsourcing content, it's more of keeping track of version control and if you need to get revisions or things like that. But there's a few reasons to do it for licensed content. One is if that content's ever updated. You want to be able to easily grab the new version of that content, bring it in. I actually just had to, I'm using a blueprint, blueprint-driven UI shell menu that I purchased off the Unreal Marketplace, and they released a new version that fixed some bugs and everything. And if I had taken that UI shell menu and just stripped it apart and moved it all over the place, it's much more difficult to bring in updated content and get it updated. So that's one of the big reasons, just to update it. The second big reason is for licensing. Now, one of the things well, I was going to talk about in the next section, but this applies back and forth, is especially when you license things like music, you tend to only license music for one version of your product. So for something like the Unreal Marketplace, and again, I'm not real sure how the Unity store works, but Unreal Marketplace, when you buy something, you own it. You can do however many products you want, you pay for it, it's yours. You can do whatever you want with it. You can actually export it and re-import it into your Unity game if you want, except for the free stuff from Epic, that has to be used in Unreal. But for something like a music piece that you licensed off of one of these other sites, your license may only be for one version of your game. So it could even be just for one platform. And especially when you're an indie, that's fine. You license a chunk of music from someone, you pay them $1,500. You're like, cool, I license your music. And then, if you're like me, the first thing you do is you get that piece of music and you chop it up into lots of different pieces and you start using it all over the place. And then now you're working on your DLC, right? And you're making new levels and you're putting in new chunks of music. And now maybe that wasn't covered under your initial license. And you might want to license different music, or you need to go back. If you chop that up into a million different pieces and spread it all over your project, and you don't know what's licensed, and oh, our in-house audio person created this, but we licensed this, and we don't know which is which, it can get you in trouble. The other thing is, if you do have a publisher, generally, if the publisher, depending on your contract with the publisher, they may or may not own that source content. Generally, if it's something like music, they will own the license to that. If it's something like audio effects, the publisher may own the final finished product, i.e. if they pay you to make a game, you license a set of raw audio, say gunshots. You purchase a gunshot pack. You bring it in, you do a bunch of posts on it, put it into Unreal, ship it. They may own that final product, but you may own all the original source content that you actually license. So keeping all that segregated and tracked just can get, it can be important, and I recommend that you do that. The next thing you want to do is really check the license. That comes back to what I was just talking about. Again, with the engine stores, you're usually good to go. But especially if you're doing something like licensing photos for your concept artists, which, by the way, if you have an artist do paintovers for your concept artist, or for your concept art, you need to license those photos. You can't just grab photos off the internet and have your artist paint over them, because the original artist, as we saw by the Obama poster, where the artist did the paint over of Obama, the original photographer owns the rights to that. And I learned that lesson because when I was working on Takedown, when I was working on the Kickstarter campaign, I wanted to do some concept paintovers. Well, I wanted to do some concept art, but I couldn't afford full concept art. I found a really cool concept artist, and he said, well, I can give you this rate for original work or this rate for paintovers. And I said, well, I'll just go for paintovers. And he said, okay, you provide the source. So I went to some photo site. I think I paid him $5 and downloaded a bunch of photos. That seemed like a really great deal. Chopped up a bunch of the pictures, got them laid out the way I wanted, sent them over to him. He did a bunch of paintovers. Sweet, now I got this great concept artist. Until the Reuters photographer, who had taken one of the original photos, emailed me and said, I work for Reuters, and the only person I've ever licensed that photograph to is Reuters, and I'm going to sue you. And I went, oh, but I paid this site $5. And he's like, I don't care, I don't know who that site is. And then I emailed that site and it bounced back. And I went, oh, okay, I I licensed that from someone who didn't have the rights to it. So my point there is triple check the license. If you're getting something from Shutterstock, you're going to be good to go. But even on something like Shutterstock, you need to double check what you're licensing, because especially things like photos, they will have different levels of licensing for a web ad, or what they consider, games usually will fall into their like movie or TV type stuff. So you want to just double check that you're getting the correct license. You can try to cheap out and oh well, the single-use non-commercial license is only $75, and maybe I'm not really using it for commercial because it's just promotional. Pay the extra $100 or $150. It's gonna be worth it. It's the right thing to do. If someone was downloading your game, you want them to pay you what you price set. So triple check the license, pay the licensing fee, do it all above board. And then the other thing to think about when it comes to licensed content is the cost of integration. I see this a lot, whether it's from art assets, or especially when it comes to things like code plugins, or blueprint packs that you can purchase. Do have, think about, if you're an individual developer, or talk with your team about how that integration is going to look. Again, when I was, or what it's going to look like for your team, as far as how much work is it going to take those assets and bring them into your game. If you have a lot of specific post-processing effects or material effects that you use in your game, it could be quite time-consuming for your art team to take those assets, apply the different material shaders to those assets to make them match the rest of your assets. And the main thing is just to have that conversation and then understand that sometimes there will be upkeep. There may be updates to that content that need to be integrated, as if you're going to be changing engine versions, and keeping up with the latest engine versions. That means the engine's going to update. It's going to take a little while for those content creators to update their content to any changes that may need to be done to the newest engine version. Or for whatever reason, they could get hit by a bus and never update their content to the newest engine version. So you may need to do that update yourself. Not that I'm hoping anybody gets hit by a bus, but it could happen. But the main point is think about that, and really you have to think about it like any third-party software. If you're going to use a third-party source control software or third-party anything that you're going to use, everything costs time, and it costs effort, and it may cost money. So just think about that. Producers and designers especially, we go, the art team's like, oh, we need to build our own trees. And I'm like, well, this tree pack is only $49.99, come on, I'll just buy this. But if it's, if your team is, built some kind of, leaf shader that auto-populates specific leaves, maybe not plugging in this tree pack into their, I'm just making stuff up now about trees. But anyway, talk to your team and do the investigation. Also, I tend to, the nice thing about content from the actual marketplaces versus some outside third-party plugin or third-party thing that's open source or maybe not maintained as much, is that you do have some recourse when it comes to something you purchase. At least you can go back and get a refund if you have an issue with it, versus when you're talking about open source content, that can be really scary. So the elephant in the room, the asset flip. So this was actually the original title of this talk was about asset flipping, because as the Unreal Marketplace expanded, there was a lot of discussion around gamers about people flipping assets. Does anybody not know what an asset flip is? A few folks. Okay, so asset flipping, the term originates from, there was a few games that came out. There was a game engine called Game Maker, where you could download this engine, and it came with some tutorials. And like specifically, one tutorial was called Bouncy Ball. And it was basically a platformer where you had this bouncy ball and you needed to bounce along these platforms, kind of Mario style. And some enterprising young person downloaded this tutorial that came with GameMaker called Bouncy Ball, and he thought he had a really good idea. And he took the bouncy ball and he made it red and he made it bigger, and then he changed the title to Bouncy Red Ball. And then he released that and made about $100,000. I think on the Google Play Store.
Brilliant.
And yes, great idea. And then a lot of people thought, that's a great idea, I should do that too. And so there came this phenomenon of people, getting tutorials or getting default content, turning around, flipping them into a game. A lot of what it tends to happen these days is along the lines of clones. So, a new version of I'll just pick a game. A new version of Clash of Clans is coming out, so they do a big advertising push for Clash of Clans. You got the logo, Clash of Clans with the different characters. Someone will go get a game that kind of has or get some assets that kind of have a similar, cartoonish look to Clash of Clans. They'll whip together some game, call it Clash of Clowns, and put it up on Steam, and it'll be a flip, an asset flip. So there's that kind of rip-off crappy game element that gamers specifically have tended to associate with purchase content, purchase licensed assets. And even in some AAA games, people have gone and found assets in the game that are licensed purchase content and said, hey, look, you're ripping us off because I found this table in the game, and then I went and scrubbed through the marketplace and found that this table was purchased off the marketplace, and there's a little craziness with that. But the example that I like to bring up of the difference between an asset flip and using assets to make your unique content is Mr. Fusion. Mr. Fusion, if you're not familiar, is from the movie Back to the Future when Doc rolls back up in the DeLorean, and he's back from the future to come save him, and he opens it up, and Mr. Fusion is the new engine, and he stuffs banana peels and aluminum cans into Mr. Fusion, and now the DeLorean is fusion power. Well, Mr. Fusion was originally in the movie Alien. So on the Nostromo, when they went into their kitchen, Mr. Fusion was hanging on the wall. And the reason Mr. Fusion is hanging on the wall is because Mr. Fusion is a stock blender that you could buy in 1970, whenever Alien was originally made, 1976? And the prop master for Alien thought that blender looked pretty cool, so he went and bought it, and they stuck probably Wayland Yutani on it and stuck it on the wall, and then it sat in the prop house for however many years, and then someone pulled it out of the prop house and stuck it on top of Mr. Fusion, and now it's Mr. Fusion. So do not ask me how I know this. It's crazy. My original example was the space station in Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. The famous one where it's got the big dome and they trap the Excelsior in and they go out. Well, if you actually watch Star Trek: The Original Motion Picture, the space station was exactly the same, except the image was inverted, and they just flipped it around. Another example is one of the Transformers movies had a scene out of one of other Michael Bay's car wreck movies where they use the same car wreck, only now there's Transformers running over it.
Bad Boys 2.
Yeah.
That was probably done on purpose though as a joke or an Easter egg.
Yeah. But my point here is that there wasn't a huge backlash. Maybe now there would be from the internet. People are like, I saw that Mr. Fusion, it was an alien. You're just ripping us off. But the content overshadows, what the actual individual asset is going to be. And my advice to developers really is to be transparent about it. There's no reason to, if you don't want to talk about it, that's up to you. You can do whatever you want. But if someone's like, hey, where did these house assets come from? Well, we licensed them off the marketplace because we're building these cool hero assets that you're experiencing and you're really enjoying, and we're having our team focus on that rather than build yet another series of chairs that we've all built. Do you really care that chair is in 3 other games? No, you don't really care that chair is in 3 other games. So that's what I kind of talk about when it comes to asset flipping. Basically just people can freak out about it, but if again, Maelstrom, great article, they're very upfront. They're like, yeah, we use tons of marketplace assets and we're proud of it, and it allowed us to ship a much higher quality game than we would have if we had just had our team building all those rocks and all those wave materials and things like that. So with that, I'm going to talk a little bit about Parachess. So the story behind Parachess, or at least the story I came up with for this presentation, is that I'm an aspiring game designer. I've been in game development for a long time. Shipped multiple millions of units, generated $1 billion, and I've come up with this great new idea. It's a turn-based strategy game, and the way that the game set works, turn-based, you have an 8x8 grid, so 64 tiles that you can move on. Each team has 5 different types of pieces. One's duplicated 8 times, and then a couple are duplicated other times. Each one of those pieces has a unique movement mode, so they can move a unique way and how they interface with the other teams. And then the key end goal of the game, the end game, is that each team has a unique character called a king. And if you capture the other team's king, i.e. kill them, then you win the game. So, very unique game, decided to call it chess, came up with it all myself. And so now I've built this prototype, I've got it all built, it's working on Unreal, you can tell the default lighting's amazing. And I'm a game designer though, so this is the extent of what I can build to, because I'm not an artist. There's a reason I made a VR simulation about being a blind person, it's because I can't make graphics. And that's what I had to make in 2016. So I made this game, but I'm going to go to a publisher and pitch about this new turn-based strategy game that I built. Now, the core, I know as a game designer that the core fundamental gameplay of this game is going to revolutionize turn-based strategy games for like the next 6,000 years, something like that, because it's just that good. It's really replayable, there's a lot of strategy, it's awesome, blah, blah, blah. But standing up in front of my presentation at Konami, talking about how awesome this turn-based strategy game is going to be, their eyes are going to start to droop after about 15 minutes. And I'm going to be like, and this block, this one can teleport over here and move across the other spaces, and this one can move left and right, and this one can move all sorts of different places. It's not going to be as visually compelling as it could be. Now, the other alternative to presenting like this is to go out, and now I'm going to turn off PowerPoint, and get some assets, maybe, just shut down PowerPoint. Love you, Microsoft, don't save. All right. What are we doing here? We're thinking now PowerPoint's going to shut down.
Windows update.
Don't do it.
Maybe. What are we doing here?
We can see it.
We can see it on the screen though.
Yeah, I know, it's just not
It's not
responding.
What's your task manager telling you?
Let's see.
Kill it.
PowerPoint wasn't going on alone.
Yeah. Maybe I left it open too long. That's awesome. No, I don't want to do that.
Oh, is that a feature to prevent stress?
All right, I'm going to shut it down. I'll blame PowerPoint. Definitely not Unreal Engine.
Never do that.
All right. Man, that would have been a sweet transition too.
Yeah. Come on.
All right, we'll let that restart. Okay, well, while that's restarting, yeah.
And your
yeah,
wallpaper
that's the background of my
happens
desktop.
to-
So, basically, what I did is I went out to the Unreal Marketplace, and one of the things that I happened to be working on this around the same time that we released the Paragon assets. So, Paragon was a game that Epic had created. It was a MOBA style game that was out last year, and unfortunately, it ended up getting shut down. for a few different reasons. One, it wasn't as successful as it should be. Two, there's this other game that came out that Epic put out. It was a little more successful.
Killed your own game.
Yeah, it's this game where these people jump out of a bus. It's really good. It's really cool. You should check it out. But the cool thing is that we ended up releasing all the Paragon asset characters for free. So the original release around GDC last year was 20 characters. I think it was about $12 million of assets. In the fall, we released the remaining characters, so it ended up being about $17 million worth of assets that we released for free. Anybody can download those assets, use them in Unreal for any kind of Unreal project that they want to do. I'm going to let this sit here for a while because it needs to dynamically load in the characters. They're soft loaded. So while it does that, you can listen to some of my sweet, sweet licensed music that I also purchased off the marketplace. So I went and I purchased those characters, and essentially, as far as the presentation goes, I took my chess game, put in characters, and now I've got an awesome looking game. So when I do my presentation to Konami, they're now looking at actual real characters that are animated and doing really cool stuff versus my chess game made out of blocks. So there we go. All right, everything's loaded in. So let me run some console fun here. Do that, set the resolution. This is all stuff I did, of course, before the presentation. Until PowerPoint broke everything. But now when you compare this to the presentation that I had before, one, it just looks a lot better. And one of the things I like to emphasize when I'm talking about this is every single thing that you can see in this scene is free on the Unreal Marketplace. And everything that you see and hear, I implemented myself in blueprints. And I'm just a lowly game designer. I am not a character artist. I can't make things look fancy. But with assets like these, I can make it look a lot better. So now, when I'm going through and doing the presentation about the difference between a rook and a knight and a bishop and a queen and a king and pawns and how they all work and how the different spaces work, they have something visual to look at. And the characters look cool. The scene looks great. You can get an idea of the size and scope of what you're experiencing. Even the materials on the chessboard are actually animated materials. This is actually water material that came with the Kite demo assets. And I just thought it would look cool to have a little bit of movement on the board, so I used a water material for the board set. And it's not just the pieces themselves. Obviously the characters look good and are animated and do all that cool stuff, but when I actually play the game, I've got animations and effects. So I've got my effects system that I ripped out of Paragon and modified. I can move my characters around. They've got animations. I'll move them around to where we can actually get a kill. Let's put her over. But the other thing is, when I talked about earlier, is it's not just about the looks. Obviously, it's nice to have cool looking characters that do awesome things, but I also start running into real gameplay aspects that I might not run into using prototype aspects. One here is when I actually capture a piece, I play a death animation, I play a little emote animation when they come in. Now, one of the things that I did when I implemented that is I obviously do a camera switch. So normally you don't do a camera switch, but when you have a capture, do a camera switch so that you can see the characters animate. And if you think about where that camera is right here, if there's another piece right here, that second piece is going to be in the way of that camera. And that's the kind of thing that you're going to run into when you're prototyping with real assets, because when you're just moving blocks around, you're not going to implement a camera switch and an animation of the two blocks like capturing each other. You're just going to be like, oh, that'll work, we'll get that down the line. But what I actually do here is when I do capture pieces, pawns are a little boring on the capture, but when I actually capture pieces, I hide the block in front of the different character. So that actually goes invisible while I'm playing those character animations. The other thing I learned from a gameplay perspective, I'll move out a rook or a bishop here, is that different character animations look good. Some of them look super awesome and are perfectly timed, like the queen. Her animation looks great, short, sweet, cool, awesome, right? Well, Quang's animation looks equally as cool, but the default animations that he comes with are a little long, kind of keep going and going and going and going. And some of them are a little bit silly too. But you learn a lot of those kinds of things. So I learned that, again, this one's a little bit long. I learned that, you know, a good animation length for the emote animations for this game are about 2.5 seconds. About 2.5 seconds is enough time to cover up any kind of lag switch in multiplayer as you're swapping teams back and forth. And it's enough time to process what's going on. Oh, and this one's really long. But having Quang sit there for 7.5 seconds in chess, way too long. So again, you know, if you're working in prototype assets, you probably would just pick 2.5 seconds and be like, oh, okay, I'll just set everything at 2.5 seconds or 2 seconds, or actually, you'll probably do what I tend to do as a game designer and make it way too fast. Oh, a half second is plenty of time. But if I do a capture with a pawn here, I'll move a pawn up. The pawn's default animation is like, I think, well, let's see how long it is. Someone count it for me. So right when he beams in, right here, hit, oh, it's that long. Okay, that's way too fast. So again, prototyping with those things allows you to kind of learn gameplay aspects. You know, one of the things that I do have in here, if I hit play again, we'll see if it just loads up the same character. It's just loading. Right now it's randomly loading between 2 character sets. But as soon as I decided to add a second character set, I realized that having a double number of character sets loaded into memory was way too much from a memory standpoint. It was just killing everything. And as soon as I said I'm going to have 70 characters, I needed to not have them loaded into memory at any one time. Because the first time I did that, it just went like, no, that's not going to happen. So I learned those development lessons from using real assets. Now, the next set that I'm going to open up, I'm just going to open up a different environment, which again might take a little bit because I had to do a fresh open. But because of the way I built this, because it's a chess game, and the way I built it in blueprints, it's essentially a standalone blueprint. So I can open up pretty much any environment, drop my board blueprint, my chessboard blueprint in, and boom, I've got a new environment. So what I did is I went out and purchased for I think about 60 bucks. Oh, now it's going to load the second character set. It'll do that while I'm talking. I went out and purchased a few different environments. This one is an Arctic base, which looks pretty sweet. It's actually, this is just the default base that it came with over here. And then I grabbed some of the Paragon assets and just threw them in. It's a little bit laggy while it's loading all these characters in. There it goes. Now it's got the new character set. So here's an example of the swapped character set. So these are actually different skeletal meshes, but each of the characters uses the same animation set. I just use that for a test. In my next version, each of the characters will actually be unique skeletal meshes with their own animation set. So, but again, it just works. And the only thing specific that I've done in these levels, for this level, they had a cool snow effect and I stuck it onto all the cameras, or stuck it in front of all the cameras. I'll run a little cheat code. But, you know, you run into a lot of kind of tips and tricks and things that you might not necessarily do, or might not run into, like, oh, that model isn't going to work for this animation because he's supposed to be in a spacesuit. That you might not run into if you're prototyping with gray box. And you know, eventually you would run into them, but Let's do something we haven't seen yet. I guess we can do that. So you find out, things like animation variety. Like some of the characters have 3, 4 animation sets. That looks pretty good. Some of the characters only have 1. It gets very, very repetitive if, your pawn animation only has 1 animation set and you're seeing that over and over and over again. Again, things you might not necessarily see in gray box. So that's pretty much the presentation. I don't know, how are we doing on, yeah, I got 10 minutes left. So
5 minutes left now.
5 minutes left. So I thought I was going way too fast. I'll just open up one last environment while this is going on. But obviously, from this example, again, I may never want to ship with these assets. These environment assets specifically aren't really optimized for what I'm doing. I'm also just using their demo levels and just dropping my content in. So I haven't done any kind of optimization or anything. The only thing I did in this space, this ruin space, is I deleted some volumetric fog that was pretty expensive. But this is a ruin set that I bought off the marketplace. It's pretty cool. It's this like destroyed medieval city. Now it's a little big for what I'm using it for. But when I play, I'm just looking at that, and so that's all that's rendered. Now, of course, I could go out and delete that out, but I literally just went in and went, oh, there's the space my board fits. Sweet. I'll put it there. But I could use this as a demonstrator to, show, hey, the way I built our game, it's modular, and this, whether it was a chess game, whether it was a side scroller that I could drop into lots of different environments, and maybe something that allow me to demonstrate. And I run into issues like, fog may look good in the environment, but fog gets like really dicey if I'm setting the camera up here, and the camera's got to look down. I might start thinking about light sources and how we're going to set up lights in the level and things like that. Things that, again, I'm not going to run into if I'm just using gray box assets. So with that, I'm running pretty tight on time. I don't know if we have any time for any Q&A, but I want to, of course, now PowerPoint's closed. I was going to throw my contact information back up again. But if you'd like to follow me on Twitter, that would be great. If you want to hit me up on LinkedIn, always happy to talk about stuff. If you're working on a project in Unreal, or if you're interested in working in Unreal, I'm always available. It's literally my job to talk to you about being successful in Unreal. So thank you very much to the IGDA. Thank you very much to everybody who's joining us online. And thank you everybody here tonight. Appreciate it.